You are listening to Here Before, Here Now, an Arizona's Family Originals podcast.
Hey guys, Colton here, your host of Here Before, Here Now. Thank you so much for listening to this latest episode. Hopefully you're able to find time to listen to the previous few as we head into 2025. I talked to a few people who are very excited about this year, but also just doing some great things on their own. And of course, right now, as we are in this 2025, a lot happening in Indian country. So we'd like to continue our mission and provide voices for people who feel like they need to be heard, especially when it comes to some of the issues that don't necessarily get reported on when it comes to like the national news or mainstream media. And I'm excited to bring up my next guest. This is Melanie Henshaw. She is the Indigenous Affairs reporter at InvestigateWest. She covers Indigenous communities in the region in the northwestern part of our country, including coverage of tribal sovereignty, healthcare, and environment. She's a graduate of University of Oregon, and she says that she's been passionate about covering Indigenous affairs her entire career. She is a citizen of the Muscogee Creek Nation, and also she enjoys beading in her free time. That is a bio from the Investigate West website. So Melanie, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate your time.
Colton, thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here. Yes, I am the Indigenous Affairs reporter at Investigate West, and I have been covering Indigenous communities for about 3 years now. It's been something I'm passionate about.
Before we get into the topic of why I reached out to you when it comes to Native Americans and receiving federal health care from Indian Health Service, let's talk about why you decided to focus your reporting on Indigenous affairs.
Absolutely. So I'm an Indigenous woman myself, and going through journalism school, I noticed that there just was not a lot of focus on our communities and our issues. And sometimes coverage of those communities was hand waved away because people thought it was too complicated, or why would someone care because Indigenous people only make up a fraction of the population. And so I found it very important at the beginning of my career to really highlight our stories and sort of combat stereotypes that Indigenous communities are constantly facing an unrelenting torrent of negativity and negative issues. And while we do have our struggles, we are thriving. We have amazing culture and joy to share. And so part of my early career was really focusing on uplifting those stories and uplifting voices of Indigenous joy. And now I've shifted a little bit more into an investigative role where I'm really taking a deeper look at issues that affect our communities and trying to find the entities and agencies who need to be held accountable for failing to meet their obligations.
Well, you know, Melanie, I kind of share the same similar kind of career path as you. I've always wanted to focus on Indigenous issues and bring it to the newsroom, to where I worked in several markets and TV stations. And I've also encountered some of the same line of questioning, like, oh, this is so complicated. How are people going to understand this? Or, you know, this is a small fraction of our community. But the pushback is there. There are people who are of our background who consume news, and it's important for them to get this information.
Absolutely. And it's something I like to say is that every story has an Indigenous affairs angle. And, you know, especially when we're looking at tribal governments as fully sovereign entities from top to bottom, there really is a way to look at each story from an Indigenous angle. And like you said, there are a lot of Indigenous readers out there who don't feel seen. And so I think coverage like yours and mine is really important to elevate those stories.
And I want to talk about the article that I reached out to you over about Indian Health Services. I'm Dene. My family's from the Navajo Nation. I was born here in Phoenix. And growing up for as long as I can remember, I received my care at the Phoenix Indian Medical Center, which is the IHS hospital here. And, you know, from just other people who I've talked to before previously, also my own family, my own experience, I've seen the shift in the number of services that are constantly reduced, or also hearing from people about budgets being cut and services not being provided anymore as they had used to. So part of your reporting goes into Indian health services. What have you found during the course of your investigations?
Right. So I think, as a lot of folks who use IHS can attest to, um, it's not perfect and there are a lot of issues. And though, of course, there's a lot of gratitude from many people to have the services available. But specifically, what I've been looking at is really the purchased and referred care program, which is, for folks who are not familiar, the IHS typically, especially in my region up here in the Northwest, can only provide a very basic level of care. So we're looking at primary care. Um, One of the communities that I focused on, which is the Confederated Tribes of Colville Reservation, which has around 5,000 citizens on the res, has one doctor for the entire community. And in the Northwest region, so within the geographical bounds of Idaho, Washington, and Oregon, there's no IHS hospitals. So all hospital level care, all specialty care, all emergency care has to be received through the purchase and referred care program, which is when the IHS is supposed to pay for care that it can't provide when a patient goes outside the system. So essentially, say you needed to have abdominal surgery, you'd have to go to the IHS and have them approve you going to a gastroenterologist, a GI, a stomach doctor, and then you'd go and get your care from the GI doctor. What's supposed to happen is the GI doctor would then bill the IHS. The IHS is then supposed to pay the bill. Instead, what I'm finding is the GI doctor bills the IHS never comes through to pay the bill. Eventually, the GI doctor sends the individual, the IHS patient, to collections. And that either goes down the road and ends up on this person's credit report, where they have medical debt on their credit report, or they realize, okay, the IHS is not going to meet their responsibility. They're not going to pay the bill. And they pay the bill themselves, even though it's something that the IHS had already approved and is responsible for. Something that I really wanted to clarify in my reporting is that, this is the IHS paying these bills is the trust responsibility of the US government. So it's not the tribes coming to the feds and saying, hey, can you give us a handout? We really need, some help. It's something that the US government has been proven repeatedly in court to have a legal and moral responsibility to provide this care. And so the tribal citizens I spoke with are just so frustrated with having to deal with this, and sometimes feel like it's not even worth it to roll the dice and go to IHS. And that just ends up building up over time when people are not getting preventative care, and you end up having a lot higher rates of treatable and preventable diseases in Native populations, and a lower life expectancy as well.
Yeah, so it's dissuading people who need care to go get the care that they need.
Exactly. And then, as you mentioned, this goes back to medical debt. So when the IHS doesn't pay these bills, it ends up stacking up and leading to this report from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which is a federal agency, found this in this report that the average Native American carries $4,000 in medical debt, which is around double what the average is. And it's also found that 8% of Native Americans carry medical debt, compared to just 4% on average. And that a lot of this stemmed from issues with IHS not paying these bills for care that it referred outside of its network. And so it really does have these downstream effects, because then, you're going to have issues getting a home loan. You're going to have issues getting a car loan. And then just the dignity aspect of getting hounded by debt collectors on the phone, or those types of things.
When I was doing my reporting about the Navajo Nation and its fight against the pandemic, we spoke with a tribal health official who talked about IHS and the care that they're supposed to provide. You talked about trusts that are in place so that the federal government pays these. This goes back to treaties when it comes to land being exchanged for going to the United States governments. Can you speak to that?
Absolutely. So essentially, and this is an oversimplification
Oh
of
yeah.
things, right? But when the tribes, again, oversimplifying, signed treaties or agreed to treaties, agreed to giving up land, agreed, signed the treaties, they were given certain things in exchange. One of those things, the, well-being of their people. Separately, you could look at the ability to hunt and fish in their regular and accustomed areas, the ability to maintain cultural practices. But through time, since the era of signing treaties, court cases have essentially been processed as high as the Supreme Court that have proven that these responsibilities include providing health care to citizens of federally recognized tribes. And so in the mid 1950s, the Indian Health Service was formed ostensibly to meet these obligations. And now I don't think I need to tell a lot of our Indigenous listeners on this podcast that the IHS has we could say, a complicated history that often included a lot of abuses against Indigenous communities. And one of the things that I've found now is that there are still, of course, lingering trust issues from that era of more obvious abuses towards the communities. But this failure to meet the obligations and the needs of our people now to pay these bills and to provide adequate care just makes those trust issues even worse.
Yeah, I mean, being sent a bill for hundreds of dollars, thinking that you're going to be covered, definitely will shake anyone's crown. That's for sure. So I know also when you're reporting that there is even a bipartisan effort to kind of address this issue, right? Both Republicans and Democrats saying, yeah, there's something that needs to be done to clear this up.
Right. And so up here in our region, we have a Democratic representative. Her name's Kim Schreier, and she's co-sponsoring two bills with the at-large representative in South Dakota, Dusty Johnson. First bill is called the Protecting Native Americans Credit Act. And essentially what it would do is retroactively expunge all of this debt from qualified Native Americans credit reports. So any debt that's associated with the IHS failing to meet its responsibilities would be expunged from people's credit reports. The second part is a different bill called the Purchase and Referred Care Improvement Act. And the Purchase and Referred Care Improvement Act would really clarify, again, in legal language, the IHS's responsibilities with regard to providing this care and meeting its responsibilities for paying the bills. Also, really importantly, it would create a mechanism for reimbursement for tribal citizens who had gone ahead and paid a bill that the IHS failed to pay so that they didn't end up with that ding on their credit report. Because right now, there's no way for people to get their money back if they go ahead and say, okay, well, I have the money right now and I don't want to take a hit to my credit. I'll just pay this bill. There's no way for them to get their money back. But this new bill would essentially, this new legislation would create a way for people to get their money back. And like you said, it's a bipartisan issue because a lot of the time there is a lot of bipartisan need in our communities. This issue doesn't look at political affiliation. It's just the IHS providing care in general.
Right. And you've spoken to people who this impacts directly. I mean, a few $100, for a lot of people might not seem like much, but for many people, it is a lot.
Exactly. And again, I'll bring up one of the communities I'm really familiar with dealing with this issue, the Colville tribes. Their chairman has been affected by this multiple times. And for the Colville tribes, you have instances of people getting hit with 5-figure bills for emergency surgery, for cancer treatment. What's the reaction when you open up a bill in the mail for $50,000? What do you do? And so this is, not only financially really difficult for people, but it's very upsetting, and the effects are pretty serious. And the local legislators have seemed to be eager to address it. And after my most recent article, Representative Johnson said that he was going to be reintroducing these bills in front of the new Congress soon.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So, Melanie, obviously doing the work out there, covering these issues that are important. When you do these stories, what does it do for you personally to get these stories out there that a lot of people don't even know about?
Makes me eager to write more stories. I feel fortunate and grateful to have the platform to elevate stories that I feel need to be told, and that my editors also are supportive of telling. I think it's great that I'm at an organization, InvestigateWest, that is giving me the resources and time to continue to tell these stories. Actually, today we just added another Indigenous journalist to our team. So that's a very exciting moment for us. And I, again, just hungry to continue to uncover issues that are really important and that sometimes other people have turned away from. For example, we do a lot of coverage up here about dams, for example. That's a big issue up here, in the intersection of tribal and treaty rights and water rights and environmentalism and things like that is an interesting intersection. And sometimes folks turn away. We could say more legacy media has turned away from these stories because of the complexities. But the complexity of the story doesn't detract from the importance of our communities. Just because it's complex doesn't mean it doesn't deserve to be told. So grateful and hungry for more, I guess, is a summary of how I feel about getting to tell these stories.
Well, Melanie, thank you so much. And I share that same sentiment. Thank you for being with me on this episode of Here Before, Here Now. I'd love to bring you back on future episodes to talk about other work that you're covering up in the Northwest.
Well, thank you. I'd love to come back, and I really appreciate the time you've taken to speak with me today.
Absolutely.
Widow.
Thank you so much. All right. Wow. Just, I mean, it's incredible when you take a look at these reporters who are just doing some great work in several tribal communities across the nation. So always support local journalism. Go find something to really sink your teeth into and to really understand. As Melanie had said, some of these issues are complex, and some of them, only affect a small amount of people. But these are stories that still deserve to be told. So that's going to do it for this episode of Here Before, Here Now. We'll see you next time.
You are listening to Here Before, Here Now, an Arizona's Family Originals podcast.